So Donald Trump has set the Middle East on fire by taking out Iran's supreme leader. And while the world watches, Mark Carney was in Mumbai making the move that ensures Canada doesn't burn with them.
This wasn't just a trip, it was a desperate high-stakes escape mission. With the Strait of Hormuz wobbling and global energy markets in a tailspin, Canada just became one of the most important phone calls on the planet.
Trump is playing with fire, but Carney is playing for the long game. Well, while Washington was dropping bombs, Mark Carney landed in Mumbai to drop a $2.8 billion uranium bombshell of his own.
This wasn't just a trade trip, it was a survival move. India needs power to stay alive, and they just realized that they can't trust the Middle East or the US anymore.
So today, we're showing you how Canada is quietly positioning itself to replace the Middle East as India's primary energy lifeline. Is this the end of the 51st state rhetoric and the birth of a new global power?
Let's walk through what Carney just told India's business elite and what it really means for Canadians.
So picture this. Bombs are falling on Iran, reports are rolling in that the supreme leader is dead. Oil traders are pounding their keyboards, and in Mumbai, a room full of Indian CEOs and politicians are waiting to hear from the Prime Minister of Canada.
And Mark Carney doesn't ease into it. He walks on stage, thanks the host, and before he talks trade or tech or tax breaks, he goes straight to Iran. He does it in French first, then English, and the message is blunt. Iran's regime is the main source of instability and terror in the region, one of the worst human rights abusers on the planet, and it must never be allowed a nuclear weapon.
He lists the sanctions, reminds them Canada has already declared the Revolutionary Guard a terrorist entity, and then he nails the line that really matters. Canada supports the United States acting to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon and to stop the regime threatening international peace and security. And in the same breath, he calls for the protection of civilians.
Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say that Canada helped plan the strike. He doesn't say that Canadian planes are in the sky. When he's pressed later, he's clear. We weren't part of the military buildup. We're not part of the operation. Politically, he's standing beside Washington, but militarily, he's staying out of the room.
That is the split screen that you need to keep in your head. On one side, Trump's war trailer, the "we bomb, you rise up" doctrine, and a Middle East that just got pushed into another level of danger. And on the other side, Carney is using that exact moment in India's financial capital to spell out why countries like Canada and India cannot afford to have their futures tied to one superpower's move.
Because after the Iran part, the tone shifted. He started talking about the last 20 years like an autopsy. Financial crisis, pandemic, energy shocks, geopolitical blowups. He says this isn't a smooth transition to some new era, it's a rupture. The old promise of global integration, trade more, everybody wins, has been turned into a weapon.
He calls it out directly. Tariffs being used as leverage, financial plumbing used as pressure, supply chains treated like choke points, and he doesn't have to say Trump to make his point. Everybody in that room knows exactly who's been slapping tariffs on India, on Canada, on Europe, like it's a reality show gimmick.
And then he lays out the reaction he's seeing everywhere. Countries deciding they need strategic autonomy. They want to be able to feed themselves, fuel themselves, defend themselves, and they don't want to be at the mercy of one capital that can flip the table with a signature.
But he also warns that just pulling back into your own shell isn't really autonomy. You can't retreat from the world and magically be safe. His answer is more interesting, actually. Diversify and partner. Build a longer strategic stack together. That means not just food and oil and tanks, but satellites, semiconductors, AI, critical minerals, clean energy tech, vaccines, digital infrastructure, you name it.
That's the part where you can see how this all ties back to us. When Trump weaponizes the old system, Carney's answer isn't to sit there and complain about it. It's to start building a new layer of connections with countries that have the same problem. Too exposed to Washington, too exposed to Beijing, and sick of being in the blast radius when things go wrong.
Then he pivots right to Canada. And this is where his tone gets almost cocky, really. He talks about how Canada used to coast on the geography and alliances. We assumed being next to the US and inside NATO meant automatic security and prosperity. He basically says that era is done.
So he lays out the rebuild. tax cuts on investment, a so-called super deduction where businesses can write off their spending on manufacturing gear, AI servers, energy infrastructure. He says our effective tax rate on investment is down around 13% and it's lower than the US.
He talks about slashing red tape and promising approvals for major projects in 2 years. He brags about $1 trillion in investment being pushed into energy, AI, critical minerals, and new trade corridors. And he drops the big number on defense, a $500 billion defense industrial strategy over the next decade, with doubled R&D on things like AI, quantum, robotics, and autonomous systems.
That's him telling India and everyone else watching that we're not just a moral lecture with nice scenery, we're building hard power and industrial capacity.
He says strategic autonomy doesn't mean isolation, it means being strong enough to be a partner of choice. And that's the sales pitch here. Canada wants to be the country that you call when you're sick of being jerked around by the big players.
Which brings us to India, because he's very clear. Canada is a middle power. India is not. India's on a different trajectory entirely. Population, economy, ambition. So Carney isn't in that room trying to pretend we're equals in size. He's pitching us as the bridge.
Yeah, he points to the people ties first. 2 million Canadians with roots in India. 400,000 Indian students in Canada, double the number in the US, 4 times the UK, and more than 1,000 Canadian companies already in India. It's also over $100 billion in two-way investment and 30+ billion a year in trade.
And then he says the quiet truth. That's nowhere near what it should be. Not when India is sprinting to sign trade deals with Europe, the UK, Australia, the Gulf. Not when India needs energy, minerals, tech, and capital, and Canada is sitting on all of them while arguing with itself over our last pipeline.
So he explains how we got here. The personal invite to Modi to come to the G7 in Alberta. The agreement to reset relations across security, energy, and technology. The 3-way partnership with Australia on critical minerals. And the plan to sign a comprehensive economic partnership with India by the end of this year and double trade by 2030.
He's got half the cabinet with him. Foreign affairs, finance, AI, environment, the head of the civil service, the premiers of Saskatchewan and New Brunswick, both basically waving shopping lists and business cards. The message is, this isn't a photo op, this is a merger meeting.
And when he gets into specifics, you can see how it links directly back to the Iran crisis and Trump's tariffs. Canada as a long-term uranium supplier to feed India's push for nuclear power. Canada's shipping more LNG to Asia to help India move off of coal. Canada selling potash, critical minerals, technology, while promising one crucial thing. We won't weaponize food or energy.
That's the anti-Trump line right there. He doesn't name him, but it's obvious who he means. The whole pitch is, if you're tired of waking up to a tariff on your exports and sanction on your oil, or a tweet that crashes your currency, you might want to lock in some deals with a country that doesn't do that.
Now, for Canadians watching this, we need to be honest about the upside and the risk. On the upside, this is the first time in a long time a Canadian Prime Minister has gone into a crisis like this with an actual plan that isn't, hope the Americans calm down.
If Carney lands even half of what he pitched in Mumbai, you're talking about long-term contracts for our uranium miners, LNG projects that actually have customers, and critical mineral deals that make mine approvals worth the political pain. That's jobs in Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, BC, Alberta, Ontario. It's more leverage with Washington when the next round of tariffs drop.
Because that's the other thing that he said outright. He knows that Trump wants a permanent cover charge on access to the U.S. market. 10%, 15%, whatever he can get away with. Now, Carney's not pretending that that's going away. He's basically saying, fine, if that's the way it is, then we build a world we're not begging to get into that market on any terms they choose.
That's what outsmarting the U.S. looks like in practice. It's quietly moving more of our exports, more of our investments, more of our technology towards partners who also want out of the blast radius.
But there is real risk here, and it's not abstract. The relationship with India didn't collapse over a misunderstanding. It collapsed because a Canadian citizen was shot dead. And our government said that it had credible evidence of Indian agents being involved, and Sikh Canadians have been living with that tension ever since.
On top of that, our own intelligence service has warned about Indian foreign interference and intimidation. The foreign interference inquiry flagged India as one of the main offenders after China. That hasn't magically evaporated because Carney can see dollar signs in uranium and AI sectors.
And right before this trip, you had senior officials in Ottawa trying to reassure journalists that they don't believe those operations are continuing. Sikh organizations called that out as a fantasy. A Liberal MP said it flat out contradicts what the security agents are saying. That is not a small disagreement. That's a government sending two messages at once.
So here's the tension. If Carney wants Canada to be the smart middle power that builds new networks and escapes US chaos, he has to do it without turning parts of his own population into collateral. You don't get to fight for sovereignty abroad and look away when people at home are saying, hey, we don't feel safe.
The same goes for the Iran side of this. Right now, he's backing the US strike politically while trying to keep Canada out of direct military involvement. He's betting that we can support the goal of stopping Iran's nuclear program, stand by Israel's right to defend itself, and still present ourselves as a calm, reliable partner to countries like India that just want the oil to keep flowing and the region to stop exploding.
If that works, Canada ends up in a rare position. Not leading a war, not leading the sanctions regime, but quietly becoming one of the main suppliers that helps big economies like India shift away from flashpoints and towards something a little more predictable.
If it fails, though, if the region spirals, if civilian casualties soar, if the war widens and energy prices go through the roof, then all these big promises about approvals in 2 years and clean tech grids and LNG imports are going to smash into a wall of public anger and instability.
That's why this trip matters way beyond the Canada-India relationship. It's a live test of whether a country like ours can actually execute the middle power strategy that Carney keeps talking about. Can we be the country that builds buyer clubs for critical minerals, bridges trade blocks, and resists being bullied, all while keeping our own house in order?
Or do we end up doing what we've done too often in the past? Talk like architects of a better system, and then snap back to, please don't hurt us, the second Washington snarls.
Trump has escalated in Iran in the most dangerous way possible. The region is on edge. Energy markets are rattled. Meanwhile, in Mumbai, Canada's Prime Minister is telling one of the most important countries in the world that we see the same danger you do. Let's not wait around to be the next.
And if he pulls this off, Canada walks out of this moment with more options, more leverage, and maybe the first real step away from that old suffocating dependency on the US market. If he stumbles, we could find ourselves overexposed to a partner with its own hard edges and no guarantee it will stand up to Trump when it counts.
So we want to hear from you. Does this look like a smart, ruthless strategy from Canada for once? Or are we underestimating the risks of getting into bed with another power that plays rough?
Tell us how this feels from where you are. Is Carney reading the room right? Or is he just moving too fast because Trump lit a match?
So thanks for watching, everyone, and remember to stay sharp, stay loud, and we'll see you in the next one.
Ciao for now.